Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, patriots of all ages, welcome to a special edition of In Black and White, or as we like to call it, In Black and White Special Edition. Now, we've all have heard, even just a month or so ago, about the devastation that's taken place in Western North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. The stories are tragic, to say the least. And my special guest for today has actually been on the ground multiple times to see what and tell what the mainstream media won't and can't either they just won't. Plus all the other stories of the failures. I mean, the abysmal, abominable failures of FEMA. So I have as my very special guest today, Mr. Caleb Cripps. He is a civilian volunteer who lives in Tennessee, who has been to Western North Carolina on multiple occasions and witnessed the devastation firsthand. So Caleb, welcome, my friend,
Good
to In
morning.
Black and White Special Edition.
Good morning.
And a good morning to you, sir. Now, even now, we're recording this on New Year's Eve, and it absolutely blows my mind how what we've seen, yes, from the mainstream media, regionally and locally out of Asheville and nationally. You've had President Trump visit, you've had Vice President Vance visit, and yet here we have just all kinds of devastation that goes far beyond what we've seen. So please, for a bit, just summarize kind of what you've seen in your multiple visits there to the region.
Well, I've been down, I think I've been back down about 5 or 6 times. And if you go back down today, here we are, probably 3 months, about 3 months after the fact. You're still going to see a tremendous amount of devastation, damage, just absolute destruction and chaos. But the most prominent thing that I would start with is the entirety of my first month down there, stemming into even the second month. There was absolutely no local government response or federal government response of any kind. Every bit of work and effort that was put into rebuilding, recovering, cleanup had all been purely volunteer, especially from out of state people. There were folks that came from Kentucky, Wisconsin, Missouri, uh, some parts of North Carolina. There were a handful of people that did show up from North Carolina, but it was overwhelmingly out of state volunteers that just wanted to be there and help. And to focus or to help frame where I'm coming from, all of this is from my time in Spruce Pine in Mitchell County, in one county of North Carolina. Um, that does not diminish any other areas that got hit hard, but it does need to be known that there are other areas that got hit hard. Asheville is getting most of the attention, it's all over the news. And it was bad in Asheville. Loss of life in any town is terrible. But the bottom line is a disaster in Asheville is not the same as a disaster in these small towns in Avery County, in Mitchell County. These are towns that are full of people that were barely making it as it was, very threadbare, not much of an infrastructure. And so when a disaster happens there, they don't have the financial pockets that Asheville does to recover and to rebuild. And the bottom line is they're also not as notorious as Asheville. So you're not going to hear about them as much as the larger cities. But the response specifically in Mitchell County, it's been abysmal. As far as I know, the last time I was down there was about 2 weeks ago. They still had no water treatment plant set up. Theirs was washed away. They recently, just within the last 3 weeks, the whole town was back on city water. That was recovered. Um, Up until that point, they were still on a boil water advisory, but it has been a very slow moving process for that county.
Now, when you use the word notorious, could you, for our audience, explain your what you meant by use of that word?
Absolutely. What I mean by that is most everybody has heard of Asheville in one form or another. The largest presence up there, probably the most popular, would be Biltmore. So I would say they're kind of the tip of the iceberg up there. So that just is an illustration of the financial resources that Asheville has to pull from because of what they have there that brings in people and brings in resources.
Okay. Yeah, so now, of course, we've heard, at least I know I have, myself and many others have. Uh, I know the state here in Florida, we Governor DeSantis has actually sent some of Florida's resources to Western North Carolina, and you're right. There's just so many good-hearted volunteers. I've heard of group of Amish folks from Pennsylvania who came and
Mm-hmm.
built tiny homes, miners from West Virginia who helped establish a temporary road between two communities and did it
Mm-hmm.
in less than a week.
Yep.
Uh, and it really makes me a little bit, I guess, skeptical as someone who's in the alternative conservative media. When the government tells you something, and I've seen this numerous times on social media, citizen journalists who are there and they're recording the stories, they're showing the damage that is still there for rebuilding. I mean, and you're someone, and I'm sad to say that I really wish I could be there so I could see it for myself, but you've been there. You're my best sort of eyes and ears. So outside of what you've seen, uh, how are the local residents viewing FEMA and other government agencies as far as response and rebuilding?
The bulk of the people that I have spoken with are very let down, if not downright afraid of FEMA. One person in particular, his home sat right on the river. The water came up to his house, but never made it in his house. He had a FEMA official show up and tell him that his house could be condemned because the water had ran underneath his house. And he has been very concerned about what could possibly happen. So he has stayed vigilant and made sure that either him or his wife are always on property so that nobody can come on there when they're not there and attempt to post any signs. Um, so that's been kind of an unknown result for him. Uh, by and large, it's been very similar stories from some folks. One other individual, the pastor of the ministry that I've been volunteering at, he spoke with a fella that he got a letter in the mail from FEMA after he had received his assistance. He received a letter in the mail stating his aid had to be paid back by April. Otherwise, they could pursue action against him. So some folks are receiving aid, but then they're being told they have to pay it back. Then my last trip down, I did speak with a woman that she did receive FEMA aid. They had a shelter set up for her to stay in, and they had put up, I don't think it was specifically her, but they had put up $49,000 towards a woman's house to get rebuilt, which that is something, but 49,000 is a drop in the bucket for rebuilding a home. So it varies from person to person as far as how FEMA is perceived, but by and large, it is not looked upon fondly.
From what I've seen and some of the reactions, I mean, just the heartbreak and the devastation. It just that's my home state, North Carolina, and it makes me just angry and and I want to cry at the same time. Especially right now, it's winter time. It's
Yeah.
really cold up
And
north.
I'll add real quick
Yes.
to you mentioned the Amish folks coming to build tiny homes. Those they were put on halt because the county was preventing tiny homes from being set because they did not meet code. You have people living in tents. Do those tents meet code? I think there are times where things need to be sidestepped and allowed to be sidestepped to meet an immediate need. From what I understand, just recently, just within the last couple of weeks, here we are 3 months later, they amended the code to allow these tiny homes to be set. But it's more government red tape that people have to jump through to accommodate an emergency.
And what really I mean, it's nice that they finally did it, but there's been damage done. People who've lived in tents, I've heard of the stories of because of the cold in that
Yep.
part of the country, there have been people who have died from hypothermia and exposure, including a 9-month-old baby.
Mm-hmm.
That is inexcusable. I don't care what these government officials say. Now, of course, here's FEMA again and the government trying to, because like I said, you're the best eyes and ears I've had on the ground. Now, of course, the big thing that they've talked about, I mean, which has been relegated, I guess, to conspiracy theory, is about the land grab, that the whole situation in Western North Carolina is a land grab because of minerals that have been found in that region, and it's a land grab. But can you speak to that at all?
And a couple points. There's one road that runs right beside one of the major mines up there. There are two companies that have dominated the area, the Quartz Corporation and Sibelco, both of which have about 10 plants in that area for mining. One woman that we delivered food to, she lives directly across the street from a dumping field where Sibelco unloads all of the tailings from the mineral processing. And these are tailings, debris, rock dust that have been washed in acid to float the quartz to the surface of whatever fluid they are using. So she lives directly across the street from this dumping site, and everybody along that road received a letter from Sibelco offering to purchase their property. This comes from one of the mail workers that delivered the letters. So the mining companies are attempting to capitalize on this disaster. As far as the government goes, I've not spoken with anybody directly that had their land condemned, but I do have a friend in Hickory, North Carolina, that reached out to me to see if what we needed up where we're at. He told me a story of some friends in Longview that had a church that was part of a strip mall that housed 5 other businesses. They offered, FEMA had shown up and asked them to use a portion of their parking lot to park some trailers. They allowed them. A little bit of time went by. They asked if they could use more of their parking lot. Some time went by. They asked, hey, could we use this portion of your building for this? And they were granted that each time they requested. I spoke with him about 3 weeks ago, and he said at that time, about a week prior, FEMA showed up on the property, said, we now occupy 60% of this property. We're claiming eminent domain. They kicked out the church. They kicked out the 5 other businesses. He helped them empty their church out, and he said that when they went there to empty their belongings, he had to show his ID. There were armed guards, and they got everything out. And he said the whole area now has fences up around it, is patrolled by armed guards, and the church had to find a new location, and the other businesses had to find a new location. And if you check their Facebook pages, you see where, they said we have left or had to be moved. But interestingly enough, that property that they occupied is directly across from the Hickory Airport. But he did tell me that he had heard from other people of FEMA doing the same thing around the edges of the disaster areas.
Holy cow. Invoking eminent domain?
Yep.
Wow. That's pretty nervy. I mean, oh my gosh. And these are stories that the media is not telling. Not even some of the, it's taking citizen journalists who are there. I mean, shows like this, people like yourself who've given of your time and your talents just to have a heart to help people and help them rebuild. This isn't, I gotta play some of this. Now, this, it's going to show up on the screen here. Deanna Criswell, the administrator of FEMA, who testified before the U.S. Congress, and she's having to explain herself to Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. But I don't want to play the whole thing, but I want to play a little bit of this because this is the type of mentality, bureaucratic mentality of what some would call the administrative or deep state, but I'll let you hear some of this too as well. So hang tight. Okay. Okay, so let me play a little bit of this. Are you able to see some of it?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Criswell, is Miss Washington lying to us?
Ms. Washington has.
She said it's common practice. You said it's reprehensible and isolated. Both statements can't be true. So someone's not giving us the facts. And I'm kind of trying to figure out who's not telling the truth.
The actions that Ms. Washington took were unacceptable.
Well, you had another employee. Now, they remain anonymous, but I think one of my colleagues pointed this out earlier. A FEMA official who spoke on condition of anonymity said Ms. Washington likely received, quote, very clear guidance from her supervisors. Is that not that person lying too?
I have not received any evidence outside of the screenshot that Ms. Washington directed.
So those two people are wrong. They're not telling the truth to us.
We are currently investigating.
But that's not what you said. You said this is isolated, reprehensible, hasn't happened. This is the only time. And they're saying, nope, 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 it's commonplace.
I am saying that FEMA's mission is to help all people.
But let's look at maybe the best evidence we have is the actual screenshot. Can you put the screenshot up on the screen? Let's look at what the text message said. The text message said, implement best practices. Like, this is the best practices. We're going to implement them. And they talk about making sure you're going in pairs or with more than one person, avoid the Trump homes, drink your water, take your towel, coconut water. So stay hydrated, walk with someone else, and don't go to the Trump homes. It seems pretty common and matter of fact in the actual evidence we do have, the text message itself. But you're still saying Miss Washington and this other person aren't telling the truth.
When I received this text message, it was not in accordance with the way we conduct business at FEMA, and I directed
Even though it said
termination.
best practices, even though it said stay hydrated, which everyone would agree with, even though it said go in pairs, which everyone would agree with, even though it said bring a towel, make sure you're covered. Maybe it said coconut water is the best way to stay. Even though it said all these practical things, the part about avoiding the Trump homes, that's not a best practice. That's not commonplace. Is that what you're saying?
That is nowhere in our policy, and I can't speak.
I'm not saying it's in your policy.
Behind what.
Yep, that, my friend, there is more to this, but this is FEMA. This is the federal government. This is almost as bad as what happened with the Secret Service. Now, just to give a little context here, this the questioning was along the lines of what happened in Florida during Hurricane Milton. Now, a lot of the same stuff that was going on down here in Florida. I mean, I had to evacuate my base here in Jacksonville because of Milton, and I was very fortunate to be able to have a place to escape to. But the folks in the area along the Florida Gulf Coast and Central Florida, even all the way across to the Atlantic side, with flooding, with water damage, winds, everything. This was Florida, but a lot of this, you might not have had the same sort of things happen there in Western North Carolina, but the fact that FEMA was virtually MIA, missing in action, that tells me something, that this isn't just a one-off situation. This is something systemic. Anything that you'd like to add?
I wouldn't disagree with any of that. FEMA finally did show up at the ministry where I was volunteering. It was right before Thanksgiving that they showed up. And the pastor there told them straight out that they were needed over a month ago, and that the people that were in the area were very resistant and very hesitant about seeing them because they didn't know what the outcome of their presence would be because of everything else that they have heard and everything else that they have seen. So when they come into the area, I think by and large, they don't bring a peaceful atmosphere with them based on everything else everybody has seen and witnessed. So I think people are still waiting, if not already given up hope, on them seeing a positive side to them. I'm not saying that they have done bad everywhere. There has been help in some regards, but the overwhelming presence has not been as beneficial as it could have been.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my gosh. I'm just thinking of, and I don't know if you can corroborate this, but I know there have been plenty of videos on social media about, I mean, a month it took them?
It was at least. It was almost the middle of November, I believe, when they finally showed up.
Oh my goodness. And sadly, I mean, I'm definitely want to bring you back for part 2 of this, because this is going to be a series. Because I'm sure you have, in all of your times that you've gone and helped the folks in trying to rebuild, I've seen things that I find absolutely nothing short of appalling. And especially when it comes to local law enforcement.
Yep.
And believe you me, I want to hear some of those stories. If you from the people that you've heard from, things that you might have seen, things that I know I've seen about how kind of crazy and actually downright corrupt.
Absolutely.
When I hear about local law enforcement taking generators from, that is not a joke. There's been reporting, and it's on social media, and I'm going to try to get it on my website. But this
Sure.
is nothing short of having it's bad enough they're taking these local law enforcement folks, county sheriffs and whatnot, taking generators, but they're taking them from elderly and disabled people.
Mm-hmm.
Where in what in the sand hell is wrong with these people? And frankly, what's their excuse? And somehow do they think that because they're law enforcement, they're not going to be held to some kind of an account or under
Right.
investigation? Frankly, I would take some of these stories to the new Attorney General coming up, Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, and the Trump Justice Department. This is wrong. This is absolutely criminal.
Yep.
I mean, the only thing that I can come with that's comparable is in Texas, there where Homeland Security, which is FEMA's under the umbrella, tried to take construction materials for the border wall and sell them right out from under the Trump administration. Now, fortunately, a federal judge put a halt to that. I mean, a serious halt with the help of Attorney General Ken Paxton and Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. I mean, my gosh, what is
Mm-hmm.
wrong with these people? Uh, uh, this is just drives me crazy. It absolutely drives me crazy when I hear that. But Caleb, I'll tell you, sir, we're going to make this a series. We're going to have a part 2 to this
Let's
because,
do it. I've got more.
oh, I'm sure you do. And yes, this is going to be a special series for In Black and White as we go into our celebrating our 3rd anniversary and 4th year, because I want to find ways to help these folks, because January, it's wintertime. It's January, it's still cold. And from what I've heard, 5,000 people with FEMA vouchers are losing their hotel rooms within days if the process hasn't started. And they're just,
Right.
where are they going to go to? If their homes are absolutely decimated, where are they going to go to?
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a lot, and believe me, we're going to definitely have you back. And I appreciate your telling your stories from the people there on the ground. Now, it might be secondhand, but hey, secondhand is better than no hand at all, because the government and the corporate media aren't doing their jobs. That is
Mm-hmm.
for sure. But Caleb, I want to thank you so much for taking time out. We will do this again and soon, because I don't want these people to feel forgotten. And their plight is still ongoing. They're
Yep.
having to rebuild, survive the winter. I don't know what's going to happen. President Trump hasn't named a new FEMA administrator as of yet, and it's 20 days until his inauguration. So I'm hoping that you can still go and help these good people, and that there will actually be real help from President Trump and Vice President Vance. But I want to thank you so much for your stories, and I know there will be more to come. Thank you so
I
much.
appreciate you. Thank you.